Okay, George. I know, but now you're the new church warden. You get to do this exciting work. So you're going to tape it. So today, welcome to Orthodoxy 101. And so today, and would you introduce yourself?
Sure.
Yeah.
Andrew Susan from Louisburg.
Okay, we've got Darlene, Matthew, Sam, Hank, Porter, Markella, George, and Mary Lynn. So last week we had our first class, which we introduced the church. And if you want, you can look at it. It's on Facebook. It's on YouTube. You can look at it and catch up. So today is the most fun class you get to have. And that is the tour of the church. So we're going to go and explain why the church is set up the way it's set up. And we're going to get to see some of the stuff, why we have in the altar, and just really explain. And then I'll teach you how to come into the church and how to leave the church. Okay? And as usual, ask questions. I do have handouts, so if everyone can take one and pass it around. And I won't tax you too much. The reason, usually I just have the camera right here and I talk into it, but because I'm going to be moving all over the place, George gets, you can sit, George.
That's okay, it's easier.
So, does anybody who was here last week have any questions about what we talked about last week? No? We're all good? Excellent. So, there is a story. I don't know how apocryphal it is, but it is a story. And it's when Russia was looking to decide what faith they were going to do, the czars. So they sent out people to the different places. They sent someone out to see Jewish worship. They sent someone out to see Muslim worship. They sent someone to Rome to see worship there. And then they sent someone to Constantinople. And that's the great church, Hagia Sophia, the great center. And while they were there, they experienced all these different types of worship, and they came back. And they said, and the Tsar asked him, or he was not the Tsar at that time, he was the Prince of Kiev. They explained what happened when they were in Hagia Sophia. And they said, we saw this worship, and we didn't know whether we were in heaven or on earth. And God must be with these people. That's the story. Whether it's true or not, but I've been to Hagia Sophia, and it is an amazing place to stand there and to see the way it is. But that understanding, we didn't know whether we were in heaven or in earth. And that's the key point I want you to take on this, because the church is a place where heaven and earth connect. We are lifted up from this world into the next world, and in a way, this world comes to meet us. Heaven comes to meet us here. So that's why the church is beautifully decorated, and the chanting and the singing and all the other stuff, is because it's a way in which heaven and earth connect. And in fact, even the way the church is set up connects us with that. And we're going to learn about that. The other thing is that you'll see in the bottom there, it says the Temple of Jerusalem, right? The Jerusalem Temple. You know where that is? That's the only thing left now is the Western Wall in Jerusalem, where people go, the Jewish people go and they pray before they call it the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall. That's all that's left of Solomon's temple, right? That used to be the great temple where the sacrifices were done. And the temple was divided into a couple of parts. There was the Holy of Holies, which had a certain number of things, and the high priest could go in there once a year. He had a rope tied around him, because if he was not a holy man, he would die, and they couldn't go in to get him, so they had to be able to bring him out. Right? So the priest went in once a year to provide the sacrifice to God. Then there was the place of the faithful, where all the faithful who were allowed to come into the temple in order to offer their prayers. And then there was a place of the penitent. I mean, they didn't do anything. They're not worthy to come in. And they had to stand in the outer part of the temple. Okay? An Orthodox church is based off of this idea of three parts: the place of the penitent, the place of the faithful, and the Holy of Holies. But because of Christ, things change. So the priest, instead of going in once a year, now offers a sacrifice all the time. And it's not a bloody sacrifice. They used to literally sacrifice animals. It's the bloodless sacrifice because Christ shed his blood once and for all. Okay? So, keeping that in mind, and we're going to talk more in detail why we have the things that we have in there, because it is supposed to be as the temple in Jerusalem. But if you keep in mind that there are three parts of the church. There is the vestibule, there is the nave, and there is the sanctuary. Okay? Three different parts. Now, churches, Orthodox churches, are usually found in one, generally speaking, in one of two shapes. One shape is as a cross. So you'll have a cross, this sort of kind of, if we extended our wings out here, if we get really big, then we'll do that. Or it could be like the bottom of a ship. And if you look at this, it looks like the hull of a ship, right? Just turn it upside down. Remember last week we talked about the church being as an ark, a place of salvation? Well, we're in the ship. We're in the ark. This is the place of safety. This is the place of salvation. This is where we're saved from the world. Okay? So in liturgically speaking, right, all of these things have a meaning. And if you watch the services, you'll learn why we do certain parts of the service in different places. I'll give you an example. When the child is being baptized, or when you ever get baptized, we actually start the baptism service there. The priest leads the family or the child in, baptizes here, and if it's a male child, I actually bring the child into there. Why just a male, not the female? The female I bring up to the doors, because the male has a possibility of becoming a priest. And then I actually say St. Simeon's prayer from the Bible, Lord, let us now thy servant depart in peace according to thy word. I'm actually holding the child, and I bring it and return it. When someone is married, the priest meets the couple back there, does the prayers, leads them into the church, and does the wedding here, and finishes the wedding right here. When someone dies, the priest meets the body there, leads the body in, which faces the altar, does the service, and then leads the body out. So you see what's always happening is the priest is always bringing them towards God. Right? We're always doing that. Now, in the early church, if you were under a penance, you couldn't enter this part of the church. You had to stand out there in the vestibule. Just think about it, all these people would come by like, what the heck did they do? You know, they had to stand out there, and they obviously did something wrong, right? And so over time, the church kind of faded away. But, for example, in my Ethiopian families in Las Vegas and Eritrean families, they would take their shoes off before they came into church because it's a holy place. And I always liked the way they put it, because we didn't want to get the church dirty. We in America, we think, well, if you walk around with your bare feet, no, that's dirty, right? You got to wear shoes. They have the opposite way of thinking. But also, if the women were menstruating or something like that, they wouldn't come into the church, even though it was okay. I tried to say it's okay, but you're not going to change cultural things. So there was this sense that that is liturgical space. In fact, if you go to some of the large churches in Europe, that vestibule is almost as large as the church, and sometimes they actually do the baptisms out there. And then only after the baptism do they bring the child into the church. So there's this kind of space. So I've been changing around the icons in the back so that it's set up so it looks like space. If you go to Hagia Sophia, and that's the great big church in now Istanbul, right, where a lot of our liturgical services kind of were developed. They have these huge doors in the back, and it's amazing because they are still beautifully balanced. You can open and close them. And those were the royal doors. Only the king and the emperor and the empress went through those doors. Over time, that disappeared, and it went up here to those doors. But we'll talk about this in a little bit. So understand that you have the vestibule. Okay, so that is a liturgical space. It was the place of the penitent, but it's also the place of gathering. So there are certain times at certain services where I'll actually stand in the back there. So, and people say, well, why do you have to go out there to do those set of prayers? It's because it's supposed to connect those people who are in the church and those people who couldn't come into the church, that we're connecting. All right? You with me? All good? Okay. So then we have the main part, the nave. And what's the first thing that everyone notices is the cupola. That's what it's called. My church in Las Vegas, the entire church here, fit inside the cupola. It was monstrous. The cupola is there as a liturgical space as well. If you notice in many Western churches, they have kind of this, they have spires, right? They kind of reach upward. But in Orthodox churches, we don't do that. We have it coming downward. So this is supposed to represent Emmanuel. God is with us. That God is not somewhere we're trying to reach upwards, Tower of Babel, right, sort of thing. But rather, God is coming down to us. Now, normally you may have an icon of Christ called the Pantocrator, which is Christ with his arms outraised, sort of like what that is. And that is to represent this idea that Christ is embracing us all. But you can also do Mary. And Mary is an image of the church. A church is a place where God dwells. And where did God dwell? Literally, in Mary's womb. Right? So she's always seen as an image of the church. And what is she doing? She's reaching out. Right? She's reaching out, embracing everyone, bringing everyone together. Now, normally around the sides of the cupola, they'll have the procession of saints, and in the four corners, they have the four evangelists. All right? But, so that's considered like the center of the church. Now, around the sides of the church, there are many different designs, but normally you'll find scenes from the Bible. You'll find scenes that are particular to that church. For example, if the church is named after St. Gregory the Theologian, you may even have some scenes from his life painted. But mostly, there are biblical stories, because this is part of the lesson of what we learn. This is part of the way in which we understand who and what God is. I remember I was in a church in the Middle East, and it was an incredible church where it was known. It was the place where the wedding of Cana in Galilee happened, right? Where the water was changed into wine. And the Orthodox Church that sits on top of that spot has all these healing icons, and scenes of healing. Because right down the side of the church actually ran a little stream. And it was holy water, and people were healed from that water. And it happened on the place when Christ performed his first miracle, turning the water to the wine. It was kind of a beautiful sort of way in which they integrated that. So the main part of the church is there to give us those lessons. Now, what we have here is along here, we have the icons of the great feast of the church. So you see on there, most of them. And we'll talk about why they're arranged the way they are, because it is the liturgical year. All right, when we get into that. But we also have different icons. Many of these icons in here are actually painted by Christians. And but they're kind of grouped. There's some, like for example, over there, it's mostly monastics and saints. Over there is women's saints. Over here, I made a new one. These are mostly military people something with the military. But they all have a meaning. And then we have a lot of icons of different saints, of American saints. And then you'll notice in some of these icons, you'll see a little disc, right? That's when I came here, since I was the keeper of the relics for the church, on behalf of the bishops, I brought some relics with us. So these are actually pieces of bone of this saint. Like this is St. Nicholas of Japan. So this is his relic in here that we've been gifted. And why it seems kind of creepy, you know, that we have bones of people, but it's meant to show the holiness. That here was someone who's physically present with us here. So if you look around, I have a bunch I brought, and we've implanted in the icons. And so when you actually venerate this icon, you're actually venerating St. Nicholas. I used to have to take the bone and take little pieces out there's something more important we'll learn about in a bit. So, the next thing we have, this is called, ready? I told you you're going to learn Greek. Analogia. What does analogia mean? No. A stand. It's a stand. All right? It's an icon stand. Everyone, we like to give big names to simple things. And usually there's a couple ways. There's different traditions, Greek tradition, Russian tradition. But normally the icon stand in the center of the church can tell you a lot about what's going on in the church. For example, what color are we in now? Gold. What were we in 2 weeks ago? We were in red, right? The church has different colors that it assigns for different seasons. Actually, to be technical, the church has said 2 colors, dark and light. But over time, that's developed. So gold is our normal color. So if you see a gold cloth, that's kind of like you're in normal time. Red is usually have to do with, like we had the Feast of the Cross. We have Nativity fast when we're in the Nativity period. And other feasts of martyrs. You'll see the church in red. You'll see the church in blue. Who could take a guess what blue is for? Anything with Mary. Because blue is a color of purity. And so when we have blue in the church, it means that we're in some period where we're remembering Mary. Green. Green is the color that we use for the Holy Spirit. And it's a very interesting how we see the color green, because the Holy Spirit gives life. And green is the color of life, right? The trees, the grass, all that other stuff. And it's also for saints who are holy saints. So we have green. So we go from Pentecost usually until August in green, because that's the Pentecost period. That's the coming of the Holy Spirit. Purple, my favorite color. Purple is used during Lent, right? And purple is not done because it's considered dark. It's done because that's the most expensive type of material. It's the royal time. You ever hear the term, someone who's born to the purple? It means they're born into the royalty. When we're in the Lenten period preparing for Christmas, for Easter, we are in the most important time of the year. So we decorate the church in purple. And then when we come to Easter, we change to white, which is the color of purity and brightness. It's interesting because it says you're supposed to put on your brightest colors, and many Orthodox churches use white. In Russia, they use red, a very bright red. Like you hear Red Square, they call it Red Square. It's actually Krasny, which means beautiful square. Red and beautiful are associated in Russian. So I use white because that's what pretty much we all do. And then we'll have, we just started this year during Holy Week, that week right before Easter, we do black. That's the color of mourning. Okay, that's the color of mourning. But interesting, when a priest does a funeral, he doesn't wear black vestments. He wears white vestments. It's supposed to be essential joy. So we have red, white, black, purple, green, blue. Did I miss any colors? What? Gold, the normal color. That's what you all buy as a new priest. You get your gold. Gold is good for just about everything. So, anyway, so now when you look in here and you see that the church is in gold, you know, okay, we're in normal times. Or if you come in and it's in purple, oh, we must be in a special color, or whatever color. The other thing that you'll notice is that what the icon is in the middle. Now, very normally, on a normal time, the icon of the name of the church will be the icon in the middle. In this tradition, in this parish, they have that icon there. St. Gregory the Theologian. So when you walk in, that's a kind of a Greek, this is like combining a Greek and a Russian tradition. The name of the church is out there, is there, and that's always out there. But I changed this icon according to, if there was a saint that week, and we have an icon, then I'll put that out. So for example, on Saturday is the Feast of the Protection of the Theotokos. We have an icon of protection of Theotokos, so she's out. Okay, so you'll see that change a lot of times. Well, that changes weekly. I have to always figure out. We pretty much have the entire year covered. So you may see, at at certain times, like last week I had the icon of a ship, the church, and the apostles bringing in the fish. Well, that was the gospel reading, and I happen to have an icon that was given to me by the Metropolitan Curia, so I said, I'm going to put that out. I have like a gazillion icons. Everyone gives priest icons. I don't know what to do with them. I have them literally stacked in my office. I have no room to put them all in, but so I'll bring certain ones out. So anyways, you see the center church icon can tell you a lot. We also have these different candle stands and candles all the way around. Candles are considered the light, right? The light of Christ. And it actually comes from the Old Testament about burning candles before the Lord. So we have candles, and they're supposed to be made out of beeswax, as pure beeswax as you can get. We get these from a women's monastery. They make them. But you can also use oil, pure oil. I like these because they're nice little. They don't make a mess. The other ones, when you have to put the oil in and have the wick, and the priest gets all messy. These are nice. You just put them in, you take them out. It's good. So people will light candles for many different reasons. It doesn't, while not necessarily having any meaning where you light a candle, normally people light candles here if they have a special intention. If they have someone for living that they want to remember, they'll do here, and someone who's departed, they'll do over there. But it doesn't really matter. Some people just like that icon, this icon, or the Golgoth where you have the 7-day candles. In the church, the candles are very important. In fact, there's a hymn that we use during the Matin service, which is called the Palileos, and that means many lights. And if you go to monasteries, they actually have a big chandelier, and that's the lighting of the lamps. And they actually spin it. It's like a light show, like a disco ball sort of thing. And then they raise it up while they're singing because they're lighting up the world. It's the first announcement each day of the resurrection. At night, on the Vesper service, some of you come to Vesper services, there's a hymn that's sung, "O Gladsome Light." It's one of the earliest hymns of the church. That was the hymn of the lighting of the evening lamp. And in monasteries, they still do that. Some monk has to go and light everything. Now we have electricity, we have all that other sort of stuff, but we still use this. We still have these lamps as a sign of our prayer, a physical sign of prayer. Remember, Orthodox we use all our senses. We use our eyes, we use our ears, we use our nose, incense, we use our taste, communion, we use our touch. All our senses are involved in worship. Okay? Any questions? You're all with me? Okay. So then we come to this space. So before we get to this, I want to talk about this. This is actually a liturgical space. This is called the Solia. All right, the Solia. And the Solia was basically, and in some churches, it's like really raised up. And the Solia was not only a space for the priest to be able to do what he had to do, but it was a way in which it was a way in which announcements and a way of space announcing what we're going to learn about here. And then you see this half moon thing. This is called the ambo. The ambo. Or in Latin, cathedra. You ever heard the term? The Pope has spoken ex cathedra. Right? That means he has spoken from here. This is the place of authority. It actually used to be in the middle of the church, and it was raised up. And the priest or the deacon would go up there to read the gospel, and the choir stood underneath. But over time, it kind of shifted, and it became this half circle. So on Sunday, where does the deacon, or just me, the priest, read the gospel from? Right here. Where do I do my sermon from? Right here. This is the place of authority. So, like, even when a priest is ordained, he's brought out and he's placed before the ambo with the bishop from this place of authority. All right? Makes it sound more grandiose than it really is, but nonetheless, it is. So, what we have here, this people call it a wall, but don't see it as a wall, see it as a window. This is called an iconostas. And an iconostas means a stand of icons. Okay? But there's a theology going on here. Now, some of the iconostases, you'll know, are huge, and they go all the way up. And it's not meant to divide the Holy of Holies from the people, but it's meant to give us a window into what's going on. Now, every iconostas has, on this side, an icon of Christ, and on this side, an icon of Mary. Right? You can see it. Just like you see right down here. The only reason we have them here is it used to be up here, but people used to come up and kiss those icons, and over time the church said, well, that's kind of inconvenient, let's move it down. So now you have a set here, so people can venerate it. If you notice on these doors, I have the same icons. That's for the priest to kiss when, because there's certain things he has to do. And that's for him to kiss as he goes in. But that's not really technically the icon of Christ. And this is not technically the icon of Mary. This is the icon of the first coming. And this is the icon of the second coming. Right? These probably show it a little bit better. Right? Christ's first coming, where he takes on human flesh. He lives amongst us. His second coming, he will come again. Actually, this is the first coming, that's the second. Right? So this is Christ being incarnate, and this is Christ sitting in judgment. Where do we, in Greek, that's called chronos, earthly time. We live as people between the first coming of Christ and the second coming of Christ. Right? That's where we live. That's where the church exists. And then above me is an icon. We don't call it the Last Supper. That's not the point. It's the first Eucharist. Wasn't that the whole point of it? The institution of the Eucharist? In fact, it's usually called the Mystical Supper. And if you think about that icon, that is an icon that is actually, the Christ icon is from Ezekiel. It's the prophecy of Ezekiel, where God will sit in his glory on his throne, and the four animals that are around him, the man, the eagle, that's who we see as the four evangelists. And even looking at that icon, this is God's presence with us, as not only predicted, but being with us throughout all time. Yeah?
So what do you mean the four evangelists? Because I always thought that was like cherubim with the four different heads.
No, there are cherubim and seraphim in there, but if you see there's a man, an eagle, a lion, and a bull.
Yes, I mean, I was always like just taught, growing up outside of the church, right? That was a depiction of a cherubim with all these different heads.
No.
Okay.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
And I believe you. I just want to know.
No.
Where does that come from?
That's from the early church. That's when they started reading back. They said, "Oh, this is what Ezekiel means," because what happens that's so important in Ezekiel is he touches his tongue with a coal. And he said that will heal you. That will take away all of your sins. The Eucharist.
Right.
So this was all what we call the archetype. So we have God being present at all time. That is called in Greek kairos, God's time. Kairos, God being present in all ages. Chronos, God being in the earthly time, makes a cross. And where does it intersect? But in the altar, where God is present at all times, throughout all ages. You with me? So that's why it is set up like this. Now, on the royal doors, these are called, remember I showed you those doors that own the emperor that were out there? The royal doors are open and closed at certain times of the service to reveal that. To reveal what's going on in there to all of us. Okay? Now, on normal iconostases, you'll have two things that go on. On this side, you'll have an icon of John the Baptist. And on this side, you'll have the icon of the name of the church. Okay? I'm sorry, John the Baptist on this side, name of the church is on that side. I'm confused. Why would we do that? Well, what do we see up there? We see Mary, Jesus, and John. Right? The greatest born of man, Mary, the last of the prophets. It's called the Deasis. It's a very common theme. All supplicating Christ. The end of the prophets and the beginning of the new age. And so you'll see that reproduced. And then the name of the church, because you gotta know who the church is dedicated to. And then you could even go farther out. And some churches will go farther out in the iconostas. For example, in my church in Las Vegas, it was a huge iconostas. But we had St. Nicholas, because God forbid you don't have an icon of St. Nicholas if you have Russians in the church. St. Constantine and Helen, because God forbid you didn't have that if you had Greeks in the church. St. Salus for Serbians. We had all these different icons that American saints all were all incorporated in that. In Billings, when we did our iconostas, it was St. Nicholas of South Canaan of Gigia. But in its previous incarnations, it was the St. Elijah and the St. Nicholas of Myrialycea, so we had all of those icons. All right, so they're pushed out. The royal doors will have the 4 evangelists, and normally the icon of the Annunciation, when the angel comes to Mary and says she will bear. In this case, they have it on either side of the wall, which is not an uncommon thing. So this is the 4 evangelists. This is actually painted by my wife's uncle when he was a seminarian many, many, many years ago. He wants to redo it. I said, you pay for it? So, then we'll see, sometimes the iconostas is built up, you'll see a next layer. And that next layer can often be the icons of the feast days that go right across. Or, they'll have another layer, and they'll have the icons of the 12 apostles going right across. And some even go up a higher layer, and they have all the icons of the prophets of the Old Testament. And I've seen some that go up like 15, 20 layers, all with the theological, all leading us up and understanding this idea of kairos, God's time. Okay? So, what else can I tell you about the icons? The other things, like we have banners, those are just for processions. This is called the Golgoth. Okay, Golgoth was the place of the crucifixion. And in some cases it'll be here, sometimes it'll be in the middle of the church, on the side of the church. It could be in different places. This is brought out on Holy Thursday, placed in the center of the church, when we commemorate Christ's Thursday night, which is actually when we commemorate the crucifixion. It's actually Friday morning. Don't ask me, just go with it. And there's actually a point where the priest processes with the cross and stays in the center. And these actually come off, and then on Holy Friday night, Holy Friday, we actually take, in this case, we place something over it, as if Christ's body has been taken down from the cross. We're reenacting the whole crucifixion and burial. And we don't just reenact it, we're there. It also has, in this case, it actually also performs the same thing as the tomb. Sometimes you go to some churches and they're very fancy. So if you look at the back there, you'll see a shroud, right? That's called a winding sheet. Right? This one's a very beautiful one. And that's when we remember Christ being taken down from the cross and wrapped in new clothes. So on Friday, that's actually sitting on the altar. And I bring it out and I place it in the tomb. Like we're placing Christ in the tomb. And it stays out there until the Pascha night. If you remember what happens, just at this one point in the service, where it talks about the resurrection, I actually lift the shroud out, I bring it into the altar, and it sits on the altar for the whole Paschal season. And when it comes to Ascension, it's then placed back. I'm actually taking Christ out of the tomb. He's risen from the dead. And we start singing and all this other stuff. And we have processions with it and all that other sort of beautiful, sort of liturgical rites that we do. So the shroud, or plashenitsa, or epitaphios, whatever language you want, is a liturgical item that is used during Holy Week. All right? Any questions so far? Is it information overload? It is for me. So everyone, come on up here. Come on up here. So I'm going to show you what's in the altar. only an ordained person technically can go in and out of the royal doors, only if you have a purpose to do it. So, first thing we have is the altar. Right? So the altar is actually specified in how it should be made, and in the and it should not be using any nails. It actually comes from the Old Testament, from Leviticus, and it's made with 5 pillars. And in the center pillar has something very important. Every altar in the Orthodox Church, when it's consecrated, when the church is officially inaugurated and the bishop comes, he actually chrismates the altar, we'll learn about that, washes the altar, and he places a relic of a martyr into the altar, someone who was killed. In the early church, where did they celebrate the services in the catacombs, on the graves of those Christians who had been put to death? We still do that. So every altar has a relic in it. And it goes in, if I took this off, you'll see there's a little disc here, and that's where it goes, and the bishop puts it in there, and it's supposed to stay here for all ages. This altar, once it's consecrated, is never supposed to be moved. Now, there is cases where we have to, because of war and other things, and there's actually service you do to do that. But that's the altar. Now, on the altar, remember I told you the Holy of Holies? In the Holy of Holies in Jerusalem, there are a few things that were there. There was the Holy Altar with the sacrifice. There was the 7-branch candlestick, there was the big censer where they burned incense to God, right? There was the Ark of the Covenant, right? You know, the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark, right? Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant. And in the Ark of the Covenant, there were a few things. There was the showbread, the manna that they ate in the desert. There was the bud of Aaron, which blossomed in the desert. There was the 10 Commandments, the tablets. And then the thing was decorated with angels. That was what, now those disappeared, right? So when the second temple of Jerusalem was built, the Holy of Holies was empty. But that was what was supposed to be it. Now the church, we have the 10 Commandments. Actually, we have more than that. We have the law of God. This is the gospel. Right? It's a liturgical gospel, so it's set up for the priest according to how the readings go. And it has the 4 evangelists, the crucifixion, and the resurrection on the back. And it's set up so that it has just the gospel, and it's set up with little numbers and all this, because that tells you, if you look at a book and it says, this week it's reading 222, 222, got it, okay, because sometimes we're not that smart. And it has a ribbon. This one was given to me by my mother, actually. And the gospel sits in the center of the church. It's enthroned on the altar table. So at certain times I take that off, and other times I place it back in its place. And why do we have a beautiful gospel? Because it's the Word of God. Right? We honor that. We have on the altar hand crosses. Right? This is to bless people, to kiss them at the end. It's hand cross. I've seen some that are monstrous, huge. The priest has to hold them like this. My father-in-law has one that was used by St. Alexander Rodovitsky when he was the priest there. And they're all different types, but just blessing cross. And then we have this box. Now, normally this looks like a little church sits on here, but we don't have that here. So what's in this little box? Well, when I have to go out and bring communion to people, right, I have reserved sacrament. So in here is the communion I prepare on Holy Thursday, which is the day of the first Eucharist. So I have an extra lamb I make. I cut it up. I place a dab of the consecrated wine on there. and then it dries out, and I put it in here. And so when I go, like I did yesterday, I brought communion to, or when I bring to your mom, I take it from here. I have a little kit that I take with me. I put wine in it. It softens it up, and I commune people. So there's never a time when there's not the Eucharist on the altar table. The manna from heaven, right?
Which was the other thing in the ark. That was the other thing in the ark.
Right, the manna. That was another thing in the ark. We see the rod of Aaron that budded forth life, the cross. Because life came from the cross. And so that's always at the back of the altar table. And we're having made, it's going to take a few months, but we're having carved, they have what's called liturgical fans. There'll be two little discs like this. They'll have the face of the cherubim, and they'll go right here and here. Now they actually have a purpose. The deacons would actually fan while I'm doing the prayers of consecrating the gifts. And when I served in the Middle East, and there were no screen windows, and there's flies everywhere, I kept, because anything that goes in the chalice I have to eat, and I've eaten a lot of things, let me tell you.
That's what Father Ted said.
Yeah.
When he served in Africa.
Yeah,
There's this thing.
flies fall in, and so they actually were having fans made, and they're more liturgical because we don't have that, but they're beautiful things. So if I read the gospel, they'll be holding the fans, the angels, above them. The two candlesticks is more of a recent thing. It's supposed to represent the two natures of Christ. I light those only when I do the Divine Liturgy. Okay? And then this is just a stand with my service book because it makes life easy for me. So what's the other things? Well, you see back here, there's another table. That is called the Table of Ovulation. And what it is before you even come to church on Sunday when I have a liturgy, I'm here usually an hour beforehand. I have a service that I do, and I prepare the gifts on that table, right? And so we'll go through what's called the proskyneity. And then, if you notice during the liturgy, I actually take those gifts, I process, and I place them on the altar. In the early church, that was in a different room. It's my favorite Greek word of all time. It was called the Cupola. It was actually a separate room. And the people would bring gifts, bread and wine, and the deacons would sort through it, and they would prepare the gifts. So when you see us now coming around here with the gifts, it was actually them coming from another building and bringing the gifts into the church. Now, the next thing I have to show you before we get into that is this. This is the most important thing in the church. If this church is on fire, I have to come and I have to rescue this. All right? This is, and you don't get to see it all here, but at certain times during the liturgy, I open it up and then I close it. You all want to know what's in here, right? Come over here. So it has a red cloth, which is basically just a decoration and protecting it. And then it has this cloth. This is called an antimencia. An antimencia means instead of an altar. That's what it kind of means. What does that look like? Have we seen it? Did I point anything out that looks like that in this church?
Shroud?
Yes, the shroud, right? So this is it's the shroud. And on here, you'll see, with the blessing of the Holy Synod of the Orthodox Church in America, Archbishop Michael New York, in 2018, this is a newer one, some of them are very old, Divine Sacrifice of the Church for St. Gregory the Theologian in Wappinger Falls, New York, and it's signed by the bishop. This is our permission to serve. This is our permission. This stays with the church. This is the permission for this church to exist and for me to serve the liturgy. And in here is a relic of a martyr. So not only do you have in the altar, but we have this. Yeah.
So do you know the martyr?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. when I ran this, I always gave a letter, but this one is, who is it? This, I have the letter back there. It is one of the new martyrs from Russia that were killed during the revolution. His name was Basil. Okay. So the bishop, when he consecrates these, I would line up like 20 of them, and the bishop had during a liturgy, and then he would chrismate them all with the special oil, and then he would place the relic in there. And then he would, when he consecrates the church, he would sign it, and it's placed on the altar. Now, over years, they get old, so they'll be replaced.
What's that thing?
This is a sponge, right? It's just a little sponge. So when I serve the liturgy, there's little particles from the communion that may get on here. So this is to keep everything clean. So if you'll see during the service, sometimes I'm kind of doing something like this. I'm basically cleaning this because I'm responsible for every particle, and I'm placing it into the chalice, and I'm making sure this is clean. So when I go inspect clergy, one of the first things I do is I open this up. If it's filled with crumbs, that means the priest is not doing his job. So, inspect. I inspect them. So we have one antimensian we found. When they get old, the relic is removed, and then they're given to the bishop, and then they're burned. And then the ashes are placed somewhere where no one walks. But we had a pile of old ones, and we found one, and they brought it in, and it was the original antimencia that St. Innocent had when he was in Alaska, that he took in his kayak all over Alaska. And now we have it framed and sealed. It's in better shape than this one. And you think he was in a kayak going all through Russia, all through the Gulf of Alaska. So anyway, that's what this is, the antimencia. So when you see me doing things like I'm folding and kissing it and cleaning it, that's what it is.
And those are Seraphim on that?
Yeah, I got this from, some nuns made this for me who were in Minsk. They sent this to me. In Belarus. Yes. Yeah. So, remember I was telling you that usually there's a little church? Come on back up here. There's a little church, and in there is not only the reserved sacrament, there's one other thing that's in there. In this case, it's in the back. Okay. And this is a baptism kit. All right, so when I baptize. And in there, you have little wands that I anoint people with, a sponge, a little set of scissors, because I have to cut the hair, tonture them. And then there's two bottles, okay? One is oil, just beautiful, the best olive oil you can get, because you anoint people with that. And then there's this, chrism. This is chrism. It's made out of a whole bunch of formula that's found in Leviticus. It's made by the head of the church on Holy Thursday. And it's got the old chrism in it. And it's got the old chrism in it. And it goes all the way back to the apostles. Right? And so the bishop, the head of the church, our metropolitan or for patriarch, makes it. And then I had big bottles. And then when the bishops came for their meetings, I would ask how many need chrism. And I would have to put them in little bottles, smaller bottles. And then the bishop brings it to the diocese, and then the priest would tell the bishop, I'm running out of chrism, I need more. And then he distributes it to all his church. I want you to smell. That's the smell because of all the different formula stuff of the chrism. So when you are received into the church, you are chrismated. And you are anointed with the oil. Do you smell that? With the oil that goes all the way back to the apostles, and you become part of this church. And so I've done this, you do it as you need it. But like when I was in Russia, in Moscow, in the patriarch's private chapel, he had bottles, like containers that were like this big here, like 6 of them on each side. Whenever I opened, when I was working in the office and I'd open the big jars that we had, you could smell it through the entire building. It's just a beautiful smell. And so that chrism, when we'll learn about what chrismation is part of that thing. So that's given out, and then the priest has the authority to receive people by this. So everyone who receives communion in the church, whether they're baptized, then chrismated, or just chrismated alone, all receive this. And it becomes part of who you are as a person. Okay? Whole bunch of stuff going on here, right? So the Table of Oblation. So what do I have under the table? I will show you what I have under the table. I have all the liturgical stuff that we have. And we'll learn about this later on in another class. But you have the chalice, right? This chalice is only used for communion. It usually has a cross on the back, Christ in the front, Mary and John the Baptist, okay, with that theme. And then the four evangelists. They're different designs. It has to be made out of metal, so you can clean it, and nothing gets kind of soaked in. It's kept, there are fancy ones and there's simple ones, but they all pretty much have the same thing. All right, so you have the chalice. Then you have what's called the paten. The paten. Usually you'll have the nativity, the scene of the nativity, the Christ child lay. Sometimes you'll have a crucifixion on it. And this one's Russian. It's really just a plate with a stand, so it makes it easier to pick up. And then over it goes this. It's a star, right? When Christ laid in the cave, the manger, there was a star. In fact, I say that when I do the service. The star came and stood over the place where the young child was. And it closes. At certain points, it's taken on or pushed off. Then you have these are actually from my ordination set. These are covers. We always cover that which is sacred. So each thing has a cover. And then over the top of it goes the air, the big cover. Right? This is just ties and makes it easier. So when I was ordained as a priest during the Great Entrance, I actually had this over my head, and I was let out because I was being sacrificed. When I die, the priest's face is covered with this. You won't see my face. Because you're not supposed to remember me as Father Eric, but as a priest. And then this goes over the top of it. And then you have the spear, it's a knife, and the spoon. If you look on that icon of the crucifixion, what's on either side of his body? The sponge and the spear. Right? The sponge that they gave to Christ when he was hanging on the cross with the vinegar, and the spear that they pierced his side with. In fact, when I prepare the communion, I actually do that. I actually take the lamp, I pierce it, and I go, one of the soldiers pierced his side with the lance, and immediately there came out blood. I pour the wine in the chalice, and water, just as the invitation of this. And then we have the red cloths. This one has to be clean. I have a whole stack of them. And that's to catch the particles, to clean everything, to wash everything, and make sure everything's clean. So when you see at the end of the service, because I have a deacon now, it's so nice, he gets to consume all the chalice, and then he cleans it all, and make sure that everything is spotless, and not one bit of wine or any particle remains. One time I was a deacon for a short time. I had to consume 6 chalices. My wife had to drive home. So the wine that we drink, it has to be red wine, it has to be naturally sweet, and it has to be able to, you have to be able to put hot water in it because it's warm when you receive it. It's the warmth of faith. and it actually has to deal withstand that. So you get liturgical wine, which you can use. So there's other things in there. There's different crosses. I have different containers for different types of services, and so that's where all that stuff is stored. And now that I sent it out in the world, they all know where they're from. So, and then the rest is just icons. Normally inside the altar you'll have scenes from Christ. You'll have the mystical sacrifice, or Christ giving out communion to the apostles. You'll have, in this case, you have this procession of saints. These are all different names that were special to the parish. And you'll have icons of the liturgists, the people who put together the final versions. St. John Chrysostom, which is the normal liturgy we do every Sunday. St. Basil the Great, which we do during Lent and special occasions. And then we don't have here St. Gregory Dialogus, who did the pre-sanctified liturgy, which we'll learn about, which we do during Lent. And then we just have different icons and things. Up in the front, on the top here, you'll see this fancy chair, right? In some churches, it's really, 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 really fancy. This is the throne. So this area is called the synthronium, where you sit together. This is the bishop's seat, right? Matter of fact, if you come to the side rooms, you can go and you can, if you want, you can go to this side room. Just don't come into the altar or go to that side room, and you can look in and you can see it a little bit better. So you'll see, so this is the bishop's chair, so only the bishop sits in that. I'm not going to sit in it because I don't want to. And then you have other chairs, as many as you may have priests serving, you may have many, many chairs. Sometimes these are very high. Now in the Russian tradition, the bishop's chair is here. In the Greek tradition, the bishop's chair is over there. Why? Well, that was the seat of the patriarch, that was the seat of the emperor. And when the Byzantine Empire fell, the bishops started sitting in the place where the civil authority did, because they were given civil authority over the people. That didn't happen in Russia, so they kept it up there. The side rooms that you see are called sacristy rooms. Right? We got a nice casket up there in case you need one. We got another one over there. And it's basically the altar boy robes, it's the water, the wine stored here, all my different candles and things of that nature. On the other side, which is kind of more my side, I have my vestments stored, the vestments for the priests, the different altar cloths, the different colors, and as well as all the different things I need. You can all come around to this side. I want to show you some things. Another casket, in case you need a casket. These are just different icons. These are all the icons for this. I finally completed this for all the special days before Lent, during Lent, and then after Lent. So here we have a few things. These are wands. Go ahead. So on feast days, I'll bless with bread, meat, wine, and oil, called the litia. And that's a litia tray. And that's where you put the bread. 5 loaves of the wilderness, the oil, regular olive oil, wine, and then there's wheat, little pieces of wheat there. And that's the sign of abundance. And I'll bless that at a certain point, and then the bread is cut up and the wine's put together with it, and then the priest goes and he anoints everyone with the oil. Anybody can be anointed with this oil. The wheat, no one knows, technically you're supposed to crush it up and use it in the next person, usually place it somewhere where no one walks through the wheat growing. So that's a liquid tray. This is the cross that was out at different times. And I have different nice smelling oil, so when I anoint you, it smells nice. And then these are just different liturgical books. Some are my own. This was a gift to me from my parish priest, so this will all be buried with this. The priest is buried with a gospel, I'll be buried with this, and my cross. There's different vestments. Some of the vestments the church owns. I have about 20 sets of my own vestments that are in my house, so I use my own because I know they fit me correctly when they were made, but these are different styles. This is a Greek style, what they call low backs. And this is a Russian style they call high backs. But we'll learn about all the different vestments. And then these drawers are just altar cloths and different gospel ribbons and stuff that you need. You know, my incense is in here. I have different types of incense that we burn, charcoal that we use. Again, all different types of censers and things of that nature. And so when you see me going off in the room, that's what's going on. These are just sacristy rooms. To go into the altar area, you have to have a reason, right? First off, you have to be Orthodox, but you have to have a reason to go in. People say, oh, women can't go in the altar. Technically, no, they can go in the altar if they have a reason to clean or do, whatever. But liturgically, you see the men like George and some of the altar servers and stuff. They're there to assist me in the service. Assist me. That's the key word. Sometimes when you got like 20 kids back there and they're all going in 10 different directions, they're not being much assistance, but I love that. I think it's great. And so they have candles that they'll carry, processions, and you'll just, observe. And when you become Orthodox, if you men are interested in learning to do any of this, you're more than welcome to learn to serve in the altar. Madison has just been starting to learn. And the more the merrier, I say. So anyway, we'll go back out. So, I have thrown a whole bunch of information at you. Yeah.
On the wall, next to it's covered with white.
It's a speaker.
Oh, this is
Father Alex put a speaker up here because he didn't have a bell, so he would play the bell off his cell phone to make some sort of noise. It's a speaker. Nothing. Sometimes a
nothing
cigar.
that has to be covered.
No. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? It doesn't mean anything else. So, are there any other questions on what you see in here? It's a lot of information I gave you. But understand that there's a particular reason why the church is set up the way it's set up. And that the liturgical movement that I do during the services is all part of the way it's set up. Last thing we'll do is how do you walk into the church and how do you leave the church? All right, first off, we talked about this last week. How do you do the sign of the cross, right? The 3 fingers, that's the Trinity. And then Jesus Christ is fully God, fully man. Right? You touch your head to bless God, to bless your head, your heart, and your body. We go to the right. Everything is to the right. Even my altar, how many times I say, turn to the right, turn to the right. You even notice me observing there when I turn, I always turn to the right. Just good order. The sign. All churches, by the way, the altar is always in the east. Unless you're at St. Vladimir Seminary and they couldn't do it, so it's liturgical east. It's actually reversed. But that's always the east. And that's because where's the sun rise? In the east. And Christ is the sun. And it's beautiful if the church is done correctly. As the sun is rising, you'll see the beautiful light that will fall into the church. And in the evening, as it sets, the last bit of light is on the altar. Okay, so, we cross ourselves. Now, sometimes you'll see people touching the ground. It's just a sign of humility. It's called or prostration. Sometimes, like when we had this cross, people actually get, and you'll see during Lent, they'll go down on their knees, put their fists down, and touch their forehead to the ground, right? You've seen Muslims do that? They took it from us. It's a sign of humility. So you'll learn about that. So if you see people doing that, it's not something weird we're doing. It's just, sometimes people cross themselves 3 times. There's all different customs. It's okay. So when you walk into the church, what you should do, and when you kiss an icon, you don't kiss Jesus on the lips. You kiss the bottom of the icon. And why do we kiss it? It's a sign of reverence. That's all it is. Like you kiss something you love. I've seen it. And the thing that drives me the most crazy is lipstick on the icons. Every Sunday morning I clean these icons because I cannot stand. Don't wear lipstick when you kiss icons. So anyway, so normally you would kiss the icon there. So do the sign of the cross, just kiss the bottom. Then when you come, you'll kiss the icon of Christ. Many people stop in the center here and just cross themselves and do the same thing. And then you are free to kiss any other icon. People have special connections to different icons. Some people come here, kiss this icon. It's all okay. It's all good. When you leave, it's the same thing. Kiss the icon of Christ, Mary, here, go out the door, stop, turn, bless yourself, go on. I think one of the more beautiful things you see, like if you go to countries where there are Orthodox, and there's many churches, whenever you see people walking by the door of the church, they'll stop, they'll cross themselves as they're walking by the church. It's just a beautiful piety that we do. And yeah, it's just the way that we do it. So it's just a proper reverence when you come in, greet the icons, and when you leave, say goodbye to them. Not much more complicated. And you'll see different people, just follow what they do, and it'll be fine. Are there any questions? I gave you a lot today, didn't I? So we're going to pick this up next Thursday, and next Thursday we're going to have a really intense class. Now, we're going to start talking about the creed. What is it that we believe about Christ? And we're going to spend a few classes. We could do that, or if you want, we could do a kind of a church history. What do you want to do? You do one or the other? You want to get into some heavy theology?
I kind of want to start with the creed.
Okay, let's do that. I always like to do that too. We'll start with the creed, we'll start discussing it, and we'll take it from there. Okay? All right, thank you all for your time. And
Thank you.
We'll see you in church. We have church picnic this weekend, so we'll have fun. No, keep the hand up.